Welcome to Todd Tinkers with Tech. I'm a big fan of trying to find weird, inexpensive PCs, and I do a lot of that on eBay or ShopGoodwill. And in doing so, I found this brand called Senica. Senica makes these industrial PCs, and a lot of times they're used for digital signage applications, or sometimes they're called media players. I'll show you an example of a previous one. This one is basically an Intel NUC that has been basically made to industrial specifications and rebadged for the client. In this case, it's RMG Networks, but this is actually made by Senica. But inside is a standard Intel NUC machine, but what they've done is they built the power supply into it. So in this case, this one doesn't need a power brick. So I found this one for cheap on eBay, I think. But today's video is going to be on this Senica industrial PC. So I happened to find this one on shopgoodwill.com, and it was just labeled as a Senica desktop computer. Didn't really have much information on it, but I had actually seen these on eBay before, and I've always been intrigued by these machines. You can kind of tell by this little vent on them, and a lot of times you'll find them listed as a media player. And again, sometimes you can find them under different brand names that Senica makes them for. This one happened to be just branded as Senica, but I've seen them labeled as Vizix, which is a digital signage company, RMG Networks, like that other little one, and some other, various brand names that Senica makes these machines for. So I was able to pick this one up for $31 was the final bid on ShopGoodwill. Of course, they charge for shipping, so ended up getting this for $40 shipped. So pretty good deal. So let's take a look at what we have here. All right, so you can see it's got Senica branding, and it's got some air perforations on the front. And it's got the hole on the top. Obviously you can see a fan through there. And on the back here, it looks like pretty much a standard motherboard. We don't have a whole lot of ports. You'll notice it's got the 19 volt DC power input, which is actually the same as an Asus laptop uses. It does have 2 Ethernet ports. We've only got 4 USB ports on the back, which is a little limiting. And for video, we've got 1 HDMI port and 1 display port. So let's grab my digital caliper and see how thick this actually is. So I've got it set to millimeters, and it looks like we're right about 35 millimeters tall. Pretty slim. And let's see what that translates to in inches. So it looks like about 1.378 inches. So obviously it's thicker than a laptop, but for a full-blown, essentially desktop motherboard, that's pretty slim. All right, let's crack this bad boy open and see what we've got inside. So as we peek inside, obviously the first thing that catches your eye is the big copper cooler. And we'll get to that a little later. But let's remove this little drive holder and see what we've got under there. So this machine came with this 120 gig Kingston SSD. Nothing too exciting. kind of bare minimum, but that's sort of the configuration with these industrial machines, is they usually, they're not packed with storage. It also came with this little 32 gigabyte mSATA module. Now, interestingly enough, I've already tried this machine out, and that mSATA module is not recognized whatsoever. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that, but it seems to be totally dead, not recognizable in any drive utility that I tried out. So I'm going to go ahead and get that module out of here. Here's a closer look at it. 32 gigabyte mSATA. Not the end of the world that it's not working. So let's go ahead and pop off the CPU cooler here. It was a little bit stuck on, kind of hard to pull off once I got the screws unscrewed, but this cooler is impressive. It is essentially a solid chunk of copper that has had fins milled into it, and this thing is heavy. It is a chunk of copper. I didn't weigh it, unfortunately, but it's really substantial in its weight, and I'm pretty impressed with this cooler. So again, I got my caliper out, and it looks like the fan here is a 60 millimeter. And looking at the thickness, it's about 13.5 millimeters thick. Probably more like 15 millimeters total, because I didn't include the little bulge for the CPU there. So let's go ahead and pop out the RAM modules. Obviously, you can see that they're SO-DIMM laptop style modules. They are DDR4. And again, since this thing is not really designed for gaming or anything, they're not particularly fast modules. Here's a look at the actual motherboard name, which is hidden under the RAM there. So we've got a Gigabyte H110TN-GSM Plus. And here you can see we've got two mini PCIe slots, one of them, the top one, labeled mSATA. And again, I'm not sure if that one's working or not on this motherboard because it wasn't recognizing that 32 gig mSATA. And down below we've got a 4X PCIe slot, unfortunately not a normal 16X. So might not be the best for adding a full-blown graphics card. So obviously in this tiny case, you're not going to be able to fit a graphics card anyway. And another issue is getting enough power to a GPU in a situation like this. But, you know, you could always throw this motherboard in another case. All right, so let's get that crusty old thermal paste off of here with some isopropyl alcohol and have a look at the CPU we've gotten here. We've gotten Intel i5 7400, Intel 7th gen, I believe, running at 3 gigahertz. And I'm going to clean the crusty paste off of the copper heatsink. Have a look at how shiny this heatsink is. It almost reminds me of back in the day when I would take a heatsink and do lapping to it to make it shinier and smoother than it came from the factory. This thing is nice and shiny. It's an impressive unit of a copper cooler. Alright, so I'm going to throw some new thermal paste on here and reinstall the cooler. And clearly I'm a complete idiot because after screwing this in, I realized that the RAM actually goes underneath the cooler. So let's install the RAM and then the cooler. Alright, so I want to go over a couple other features of this motherboard. It's only got 2 SATA ports on it. It's not the end of the world, but that's all it has. And up here we've got 4 RS-232 serial ports. This is an industrial machine, so those could be useful for robotics or something. So here's where it gets interesting. This is an FPD header for controlling a monitor. And that is the LVDS header, which allows you to basically directly connect an LVDS display, which are, typically might come with a laptop. But I'm guessing, this might have been used for a kiosk situation, or maybe, I don't know, a slot machine or some other kind of touchscreen situation. So it's kind of an interesting feature that this motherboard has that you'd really only find in maybe a laptop or something. You probably need to have a custom cable for it. That's where it gets tricky. Most LVDS displays use one of the, super thin ZIF ribbon cables, and you'd have to get an adapter to get it to work with that. It would take some time and effort to actually figure out how to get a display working from this. If you have any suggestions or tips, leave them in the comments. One thought I did have is that arcade 1-up machines apparently have LVDS displays in them. So this could be a cool way to mod an arcade 1-up game and just run one cable into the LVDS monitor. But again, I'm not sure if arcade 1-up machines, if some of them have 40-pin cables or 30-pin cables. This motherboard has a 40-pin, so I don't know if that would be an issue adapting it. Again, it's a can of worms, but it is an interesting feature. So seeing that this machine didn't come with internal Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, I scavenged through my parts bin and I happened to find a Intel Wi-Fi Bluetooth combo mini PCIe card, so I'm going to go ahead and install that in here. Unfortunately, the second antenna pigtail happened to be a little bit too short to use the port that on the back of the machine that's actually made for an antenna. So in this case, I either need to get a longer cable or just make it work. So in this case, I'm actually going to use, there's another slot in the back, looks like maybe for adding another HDMI port or something. So I'm just going to make that work. It should be fine. Sometimes you just got to improvise. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this machine, get it all back together, trying not to catch those wires. There's only 2 little screws on the back that hold the case on. It's another shot of the back with the newly installed antennas. I know it's not ideal having the one hanging out of the HDMI port or whatever that is, but hey, it works. It's solid. It's not going anywhere.
Alright, so now that we've got it back together, let's boot this thing up and have a look at the BIOS. So as you can see, it's a fairly basic BIOS, doesn't have a graphic interface, and you know, this being an industrial machine, that's sort of par for the course, I would think. So let's have a look. I'm gonna set the memory to enhance performance. I don't know, I'm not really sure if that does much, but what the heck. And so just going through some of the settings. Fan speed control. This fan's a little loud. I'm going to set it to silent, see how it does. Has a few different languages. Prefer not to show a logo when these things boot. Under the boot options, you can see number 3 is IBA GE slot. That is Intel Boot Agent, where it boots over the internet. So I should probably turn that off. So I'm going to turn on Windows 10 here. So here's the controls for the 4 serial ports that are built into this machine with its Super I/O chip. USB, I'm going to turn off legacy support. I'm not using any old USB devices currently. So here's our SATA ports. The mSATA currently empty because I pulled the one that wasn't working at all, that wasn't showing up there. And we've got 2 additional SATA ports. Alright, so here's the internal graphics. Now you see it's got the LVDS mode. So currently that's set to 800 by 600 18-bit. So I guess that's where you'd have to configure it if you are running an LVDS monitor. DVMT, setting it to the maximum amount of memory for the built-in integrated graphics. So power settings. So this is essentially your basic BIOS, nothing particularly fancy about it. So I went ahead and installed Windows 10 on this machine and a bunch of the apps that I typically like to use. This is Specky, which gives you a good overview of your system, and especially good with temperatures because it shows a graph that I really like. It's a good way to kind of test out, you know, how good your CPU cooler is working. So you can see here that, you know, I set the fan to silent mode in the BIOS, but we're got about 34C under idle, so that's not too bad. Pretty good with that giant chunk of copper there, but of course it's not really under any load. Here we can see the RAM. For some reason it's reporting 4 memory slots. Obviously it's not the case. We've only got 2 in this motherboard. This app also gives you a good readout of power that it's using, etc. So here's our internal graphics and our storage. So thankfully everything checks out on the 120 gig Kingston SSD that it came with. All right, so now I'm going to launch the graph for the CPU temperature, and I'm going to launch something to stress test it a little bit. So let's go for Cinebench, which is the Maxon 3D app that I like to use for stress testing CPUs. So after launching Cinebench, I'm going to bring up the specky graph on top. So we can see that the temperature is definitely starting to go up a bit once C40 is running. So I'm going to go ahead and skip forward a bit and speed up this clip so you can see that the CPU never really gets above 60 degrees centigrade. So I call that a win. That's pretty good. And of course the fan is still in silent mode. Now, one issue I did find is that the fan, even in silent mode, the fan is a lot louder than I would like it to be when it's under load. And I realized that if I took the top of the case off, the fan is actually quite quiet. So the vent on the top of the case for the fan, that's causing the noise. The grid on there on the top of this case seems to be causing quite a bit of noise. So I don't know. I'm almost, I would consider maybe taking a Dremel to it and cutting the lattice off to improve airflow, because it's really much louder with the top of the case on versus without. I could see running this somewhere, where it's going to be out of the way in a closet somewhere or whatever without the top of the case, because there's no real need for that. So if it were installed inside, again, an arcade 1-up machine or something, I'd probably just leave the top of the case off to improve the noise factor. So the overall Cinebench results on this machine were pretty miserable. I'm guessing maybe because it only has 8 gigs of RAM, but this machine is not fast. Also, it might be the slow 8 gigs of RAM. I don't know, but really abysmal results in Cinebench. So obviously, you're not going to use this machine for doing anything powerful. But I think this could make a decent Plex machine or Jellyfin or, something like that. Kodi media player. I think this is a good little machine for that kind of stuff. And again, maybe throwing this in an arcade machine, because it's so thin and can run off of an external power supply. There's a lot of interesting uses for this little machine and or motherboard. So
that's it for this video on this little mini Senica ITX PC. I really appreciate you watching. Hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please give me a subscription. I would appreciate it. It'll help me build this channel. And thanks a ton for watching.